Hey, welcome to another Chin-Wag, and this is Chin-Wag number 11, and it's kind of awkward that you're coming to me from my vehicle, isn't it? Well, the reason why I'm doing this is because I wanted to ask you just a simple question. Where do you hear from God? I mean, think about it. Now, I know there's a lot of teachings out there that ask the question and tell you, boy, if the literalists, for instance, they tell you if you haven't heard the audible voice of God, then they question how deep of a relationship you have with God. Then you get the other ones who just, don't just write it off as a biblical thing, and they don't really make any point of it to hear from God anymore. And so I thought I'd just ask the question and look at it from the perspective of, how do you hear from God? Teachings aside, everything aside, what is it that prompts you to hear from God? I've heard it said before that God oftentimes speaks through whispers, and if you read the Old Testament, you're going to find that to be very true, that God does speak to you through whispers. And so I think that's a pretty intriguing thing when you think about it, that, it's the unorthodox ways that God actually does speak to a person. Perhaps it's through a simple, walk in the park. Maybe it's a simple talking with somebody. Maybe it's a simple car drive. Now, the reason why I'm driving right now and doing this Chin-Wag as I'm going through downtown Wapaka, the big city, is that there's two ways that I know for sure I'm going to hear from God. Number one is simply driving in the car and not having the music going. Now, a lot of times I'll have, let me pop it here. I have my XM satellite radio, my Sirius satellite radio going, and some of my favorites are classic vinyl, the metal channel, a lot of different talk programs, not the Christmas channels either, and not the Christian channels, but I'll turn that off and just begin to say, God, speak to me. A lot of times, when you're in Wapaka, you got to drive 35 miles to get to the closest mall, which can actually get to be quite a drain. But if you're like me, those times you really begin to cherish. I'm somewhat of a new parent. I have a 3.5-year-old and a 2.5-year-old, and it's through driving that sometimes I'm just away from them. And I love my kids, but when there's so much busyness going on in and around you, sometimes I think a lot of important things get drowned out. So what is it about driving that helps out? Well, you're focused, you're just taking time. You really can't rush, because if you do, you're going to meet the law, and you don't want to do that, and so you're forced to slow down a little bit. I don't know how many times I've had my notepad next to me when I'm driving to just hear from God, and so many good ideas, so many great things come as a result of it. I would encourage you, get in your car and just drive sometime. Maybe you're that Sunday driver, maybe you don't like going for those Sunday rides. Whatever the case is, begin to say, God, speak to me through these things, and see what happens. Another area that I really enjoy hearing from God at is going out in nature, going for a walk, taking a simple stroll. How many times have you heard people stand at the brink of the Grand Canyon, the very edge of the Grand Canyon, and say, wow, how could there not be a God? Or for some people, it just solidified the fact that, there is a God, because how else are we going to get a Grand Canyon of such a great immensity? It really is an interesting thing how even people that aren't Christians look at something so magnificent as the Grand Canyon, an ocean, whatever, and say, yeah, there's got to be a God. One of my favorite areas in Wapaka is just a little place called Shambo Park, and it used to be a quarry, and since quite a few years ago they've actually turned it back into, what they did was they filled it in with water, and therefore they're not able to use it anymore. But the cool thing about it is that with it being a quarry, you begin to understand the size of it, and with it filled in, you can actually begin to see water, fish, ducks and geese swimming around out here, and it really becomes a great area for me to hear from God. I'm actually going down the path to it right now. if I can get close enough. There's a big rock in the way, but you know, it's just one of these things that this little path to me means so much, because when I first moved up here, I went through two of the most horrific storms of my life as a Christian, as a pastor, to the point where I was going to throw in the towel and just say, you know what, forget the ministry. I'm done. I'm not going to be a pastor anymore. And it wasn't until I got down this little trail here, let me dismount the camera, that I got down to this little trail here and began to notice all of the things that God was doing in my life. It's just a dark little trail, isn't it? That rock used not to be there, but they must have put it there so cars don't drive back there. But it's just a neat place. So the question is, where do you go? Do you hear from God? One pastor told me, one friend of mine told me, you know, the way that God speaks to them is through peace. Isn't that great? That's such a good thing, that simple peace. God said He's not the author of confusion. So sometimes the peace of mind comes and we have a peace about what we should be doing or what we should not be doing. Shoot me your thoughts. info@thatsnotmygod.com. I'd love to hear from you on how do you hear from God. Maybe you've heard the audible voice. Maybe you haven't. How do you stay in touch with God? Talk to you soon.